Welcome back to the Football Fitness Federation podcast. I'm delighted today to be joined by Dave Tenney, the newly appointed High Performance Director at Austin FC. So first of all, Dave, congratulations on the new role.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
And thank you very much for coming on. It's great to finally speak to you and have you on the podcast.
No, thanks for having me. I've been an avid listener now for the last few months, so it's an honor to be on.
Oh, that's great to hear. That's great to hear. No, thank you very much. It's like I say, it's great to have you on. So if we dive into, I've just touched on your current title, the new role, and I'm sure people would have followed your journey and seen recent roles. But do you want to just take us through your career so far?
Sure. I feel like that's a long time, so I'll be very brief. I had a very average playing career, pro, semi-pro, indoors, outdoors, and US, a little bit in lower leagues of Germany. Stopped playing around the age of 28, 29. Went back to school, finished my degree in coaching science, George Mason University. Rolled into the master's program there in exercise science, human performance. Some of the staff that I'd played under in indoor soccer had taken over the women's pro team in Washington at the time. And so started on the staff with them kind of right out of the gates, luckily. And then that rolled into being able to do the A license course through the Czech FA, which was kind of the game changer for me, kind of switched over into the more kind of the sports science and fitness side, specialized in that post this course. And that was in 2004. And was lucky to get a chance to go to Kansas City. It was Kansas City Wizards then, Sporting KC now in 2007. And then joined Seattle Sounders in 2009 and kind of evolved the role like many of us kind of do. We're in one place and what was going on over a decade ago versus now, and started as head fitness coach and ended as high performance director after 9 years in Seattle. And then went to the Orlando Magic. We just finished 3 years there. Just was interested to have a different experience, challenge myself. It was a great experience. And then just recently in the last month, I've joined Austin FC to be the new high performance director for Austin FC, who will start MLS in 2021. So
awesome. And what led to the decision? I'll start again. What led to the decision? Easy for me to say, to come back to football or soccer day from the NBA.
A couple of things. I mean, quite honestly, I just missed the sport. I mean, it was obviously the sport that I loved and played growing up and had worked in for my entire life. My entire working life was in the sport of soccer, football. Having been with the Sounders for 9 years, I just had this urge to try something different, to challenge yourself, to kind of reinvent yourself in some ways. And I had this opportunity to go to Orlando, and and I think I would almost challenge. It's not possible for everyone here to go work in a different sport or a different country or different environment, but to be able to go work in a different sport, like the NBA, really just helps you see things totally differently. It gives you a different perspective. And so, I really embraced that and wanted something totally different, thinking that, I will get to know the sport like I did soccer. Mm-hmm. Once you're in there, I think I realized there's two things. One was I will never know the sport of basketball as well as the sport of football, and the learning curve was far steeper than I would have thought going in. Because I'd been around basketball my whole life, but the NBA, the intricacies of the play calling, the offensive schemes, the defensive schemes, the kind of the different positional roles were so obviously very advanced, very complex. I thought I would understand it, but it'd be like someone walking into a Premier League club out of a totally different sport and trying to understand exactly what the coach wants in every different position, which I feel is important still for my job. So I think there was that recognition that okay, football is my sport. I'm not going to know basketball ever as well as soccer, football. And then two, the nature of the role of the high performance director within the NBA is a very different role. It It's very managerial. It's a staff of about 11, 12 people. It is talking to a lot of agents and doctors and management. There's very little practice or training once you get into the season. So that's not as much of a interaction with the head coach as, let's say, in our sport. And so I didn't feel at times where it was kind of like, it didn't stimulate me in the way that I've really enjoyed what I got out of being a performance director in football, where you're kind of sitting down with a coach, trying to tick the boxes over the course of the week of what you want to hit technically, tactically, physically, to get the team prepared for the next game. Like you don't really have that in the NBA, because it's always the next game and the next game and the next game. Then there's an injury. Then you're talking to a doctor, you're talking to an agent, and you're giving weekly updates to agents on the status of their players. It was a really different type of role that you didn't really anticipate until you're in it.
Mm-hmm. And we're going to delve into some of the sort of lessons or takeaways on that shortly. One thing I was going to ask, Dave, is because a lot of people will go into a new role and probably be quite unsure on where to start. We've spoke a lot about it on the podcast, that some people will go in and they'll go in like gung-ho and everything will be changing from day one, and others will take that sort of step back and look at things and then gradually make some changes. So what's your approach going into the new role with Austin?
Well, I mean, I guess I would think globally for anyone going into a new role, what I would say is one of the most important things is to really to feel almost lean into that role, feel your way into that role. And too many times people kind of have a very strict conceptualization of what that role is going to be before they go in. And that may not actually be exactly what the person that hires them thinks it's going to be. Yeah. Right. And a new practitioner could come in and kind of, create conflict or kind of run headfirst in the walls right away because they think their job is X and they're going to walk in doing X, but they haven't really asked the questions of like, okay, what are your expectations of me? What's my actual role? What are my responsibilities? What do you expect from me on a daily basis? What do you expect? What time should I be in the morning, and what should I wear, and who do you want me to talk to, and who do you not want me to talk to? And it's kind of there's lots of little things like that. And I would often remind kind of young staff members that will come in. One of my advice to them was always like, try not to step on landmines, because it's really easy to step on a landmine and have no clue you're doing it. And if you look at, let's say, some of the U.S. military, when they're onboarding staff members, they have what they call like they've termed it a 3-month no-fly zone, right? Where, listen, for 3 months, just sit, just absorb, don't talk too much, don't go into places you might not be welcome, and kind of feel your way in. And then the right doors will open up. You'll be accepted. You will, you'll be given the responsibility that you want. But don't create resistance by, coming in like, I'm going to make my mark right away, I'm going to show them my talents, until you really know what the people that have hired you expect out of your role, right? So that's more global. I would say with me and my role, I think it's a lot here. It's going to be a job, built around, the needs of the head coach, Josh Wolf, and then the general manager, Claudia Reyna, our president. I forgot what the exact titles are. The chief soccer officer, I think they're called in MLS, but essentially the club presidents. And now it's here. It's about what's exciting about this role is it's coming into an expansion team, and you're building a staff, and you're building infrastructure, and you're building technology, and you're building a data structure with a new director of sports science analytics we've hired. You're trying to create a culture coming in. And so that this particular job, it's a lot more building infrastructure, process, and systems as you come in, which I think is what's really exciting about this role with a head coach that highly values high performance, that wants to play a certain way, and where we will have environmental challenges here in Texas, and the ability for athletes to do things at a certain physical level are really, really important, to this coach. And so how we build the right structure around the players is going to be really critical. And I think that's what's exciting for this particular role.
Yeah, because it's going to be very different, isn't it? Because if practitioners are moving in Europe or the UK, generally they're going into a club that has, there's something there already, isn't there? There's already a culture, there's already somewhat of a staff in place. So it is very different, isn't it? But it's just interesting to hear your way of thinking going into that role. And I think people can learn a lot from listening to you talk about it.
Yeah, I think people feel like they have to put their stamp on things as soon as they get in, and maybe sometimes they have to. Maybe that's a reality for some people. But again, I think sometimes practitioners can step on landmines trying to make their mark too quickly and too early, until it's been made clear to them what their role is. And sometimes that's up to management. I think practitioners can do well by trying to ask their superiors as they get in, like, okay, what do you expect of me? What do you want? How should I do things? How should I not do things? And that's some of the things I think I've especially learned in the last 3-4 years of going from Seattle to Orlando, now to Austin, that those are really important questions that we have to ask as we go into new organizations.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. And then I was going to ask as well, so from going from soccer to the NBA and then back to soccer, on reflection of working in the NBA, what do we do well as an industry in terms of physical preparation for soccer or football?
I think within soccer, football, there's a naturally integrated model that has developed over time, like we just talked about. Like that, and maybe it's part of my frustration having been in the NBA, is like, it's not a let's get together with the coach and let's tick a technical, tactical, physical box over this week, and what exercises hit the physical as well as the technical, tactical. That's not so NBA like. But it is very, within football, it is very natural. And you have your tactical periodization and your structured training from Barcelona, and the football conditioning Verheyen model. It's like the football culture breeds very well kind of this integrated model, where I think there's been more of a movement in the last 10 years away from, let's go running in the woods, and then let's go do isolated technical work, and then let's go do a very isolated tactical exercise, and then let's go lift weights. There's less of that, right, in the football environment. And I think that shows the evolution of the sport, which is a positive. If you want to flip it, what do I think that football doesn't do as well? And maybe that's relative to the NBA. I mean, I think what was interesting to me about the NBA was how highly individualized the environment was. That was fascinating to see. And again, part of my role was having a series of physical therapists and strength coaches and sports scientists, and then within an NBA staff for 15 or 16 players, you have 5 assistant coaches, right? So every player has an assistant coach that's assigned to them over the course of the year, and I've assigned a therapist to them, and then there's 1 or 2, between your strength coaches or sports scientists, the right person with each athlete. And essentially on a daily basis, each athlete had a assistant coach, a strength coach or sports scientist, and a therapist assigned to that guy to check in, to work, and that those 3 people kind of worked as a team around each athlete. Mm-hmm. And so, what I thought the NBA does really, really well is, if you have a 10:30 practice, the first athletes come out about 8:50 for a 10:30 practice. And so your young players come out, and, 3 or 4 young guys would start doing 20-minute technical session, video session, activation for 20 minutes, 8:50 to 9:10, go and eat breakfast, and then come out for the main session at 10:30, every day, every day. So every athlete got exactly what they need on a daily basis. And that's, again, from a physical, or maybe a movement, a therapy standpoint. It's from a technical standpoint. It's from a physical strength training standpoint. Now you had the resources within the NBA. You have the resources to be able to provide. Teams will have 4 to 5 therapists, and again, 5 strength coaches, and 5 assistant coaches, 2 or 3 strength coaches, where each guy can come in and get a 20-minute session each one of those parties before the main session at 10:30. And so that kind of like opened my eyes of like, okay, sometimes I think at football we can think of so much of everything as a team level, and yes, the team is really important, but within the NBA, we'd have discussions with the head coach of, the 13th guy on the roster of 15 who is only shooting 29% from 3-point range, but by year 3, he has to be shooting 37%. And how do we get him from 29 to 37%? And the right 20-minute, 30-minute dose every single day helps get him from 29% to 37% because he's a far more valuable player if he can shoot 37% by the time he's in his third year.
Mm-hmm.
Those thoughts are always there with the young players in the NBA.
Mm.
And as you kind of get into the mad rush of a soccer football season, it's easy to worry less about the guys 20 through 24 in your roster and what their needs are and how are they keeping up. And they'll do top ups at the end of sessions, and they'll do 4-on-4s or 5-on-5s the game after sessions, but like what do they really need in terms of a player development standpoint to be where they need to be by year 3? I'm not sure we do as good of a job within our sport as they do in the NBA.
That's a great point. It's something, again, we've talked about a lot in terms of players' utilization of like external practitioners or private coaches, because like you said, the need for that individualization, but there's also the want from the player as well, isn't there? That they want that individualized approach. So do you think that's the way that football soccer will go eventually? Obviously, it comes down to resources, like you mentioned before, doesn't it?
And one of the reasons why the NBA staffs have grown in size so much within the last five years or so is because you rather than having that athlete who might make $10 million, rather than have that athlete go off and hire external people to work with him, you are better off keeping that in-house and hiring an extra therapist or an extra strength coach or an extra assistant coach to give that player what they need, right? And so maybe that's within football, soccer, that's not actually possible, with the resources a lot of clubs have. But within basketball, you've seen now clubs that have 5-6 therapists, and you have clubs that have 10 what they call player development coaches, which coaches that really specialize in technical development and shooting and some of those very refined skills that NBA guys need. There's a bigger investment on the staffing, which again comes back to like my role going in. Like my role, rather than focusing on the relationship with the coach, it was making sure each one of these guys has the right therapist around them, has the right strength coach, and triangulating with the assistant coach what they're getting on a daily basis. And it's a lot more coordinating, I guess, of a role. And then making the agents and any external practitioners feel like kind of fostering those relationships as well. Our head strength coach with Orlando would know most of the external practitioners. If a player has his own person, that maybe the guy doesn't want to be in the facility more than 4 hours a day, so he's going to get a strength session at home with his practitioner. Well, we are in contact with that the person's external practitioner, so we've got a good relationship, and and so you always have a little bit of say or control in what each athlete's getting, because we don't want to get in that mode where every athlete has his own group of people at home, and he comes in for team practice, then goes home and has his own therapist and his own strength coach and has his own. You don't really want that. So we haven't even talked about the nutrition side, but a lot of these top level athletes have their own chef, nutritionists, especially chefs. And so from a chef and therapist and strength coach side, being able to foster relationships, if an athlete chooses to have their own people, that at least you're trying to work as a team and get on the same page, rather than resist and tell them they don't need that.
Yeah, because that's definitely something that's accelerated in football over the last few years, isn't it? That the external practitioners, I think, are definitely, the numbers have increased.
Yep.
But also the reception of clubs. Like I've spoke to a lot of people on the podcast that are at clubs that say, yeah, we work with external coaches. We engage with them like you're mentioning. We find out what they're doing. We take control of it somewhat. But then there's, I suppose, a few years back and when it first started, there was a lot of like it wasn't as well received, was it? It just seemed like players were going out of their way to do extra stuff. So it's how we integrate it, isn't it? You talked about integration within the coaching staff, but now I suppose it's within the coaching staff and then a little bit wider as well.
The threat. Yeah, I mean, that's what you're saying. Like as much as if you're within the club, you see it as a threat. And if it's done wrong, it can be a threat. You can lose control of an athlete and what they're getting when they leave. But the flip side, you can flip it and say, whether it's, let's say Premier League or NBA, like these guys are, the athletes are traveling so much. Like they are literally, if you're in the NBA, guys are tired. Like you can't face the fact that you only get home at 3 a.m. so many times where like our athletes are tired. Mm-hmm. And so being able to work with, you want a certain amount of work done, but if a guy says, listen, I'm just tired, can I go home and I can do a strength session with my guy back at home at 4:00 today? If you can develop the right relationship and work with them, then you do allow that athlete to kind of get out of the facility because they are mentally and physically tired, get home, rest, and then get the work that they need later on. Like that's an okay solution.
Mm. And then I suppose tying in with that as well, like where you were talking about the numbers available in the NBA, I can sort of hear all the coaches at the lower league clubs in England or even Premier League clubs going, I wish we had all these people available to us. So and clubs don't have that right now. So utilizing these external people in the right way.
Yeah, but also I think it's interesting because I think within the NBA, it just has had to develop in that way. And again, if to me, what's happened is you have these NBA superstars that they want to get their own therapist, their own strength coach, right? And so the club might go to this athlete and say, listen, rather than you go get your own person, then we will go and get a therapist just for you. Then we know your status and then you don't have to pay for it, right? Because again, if a guy is making $10-12 million a year, you can get someone of good quality at a fraction of that cost that is a good investment in that athlete and helps keep that athlete tied to the organization. The problem is it's still not cultural where that's I think accepted at times, because again the salaries in the Premier League continue to escalate, and you do see like we were talking before the show about the all or nothing with Tottenham, and you see the the locker rooms at Tottenham and just the number of therapists there, and there's 5 guys lying across the table, and 5 therapists working at the same time, and that's so Premier League clubs are doing the same thing. Like it's there too, but it's that's going to be more the norm, for this trickle down. I mean, okay, your top 5 to 6 can financially afford that, but it has to be. Does the bottom half of the Premier League, do they see that as a good investment, to continue to add more, more people? And then does that trickle down the Championship? Like these are all investments in your athletes, which helps hopefully keep them on the field, which is they're good investments. And there's still, I think, staffs that are operating, that should have the resources, but they have far less support from the clubs, I guess, and they probably should, and I definitely respect that.
Yeah, when you're talking about investment as well, it's obviously important for the club because if they can progress a player within the club without going out to spend millions on an external player, then obviously that saves the club money in the long run, doesn't it? By a short-term investment in, like you say, whether it's therapists, S&C coaches, whatever it is that the player needs and wants to develop.
Yeah, exactly.
And then Dave, so just to move it on, so more lessons from the NBA. We're going to delve into this in more detail, but looking more at the strength program. So I think it's quite fascinating to look at the two sports. There's crossovers between the two sports, isn't there, in terms of the demands. So what are some lessons that sort of jump out to you on the way that NBA players physically prepare in the gym, and how we prepare in the gym for football or soccer?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a general embracing of strength training in the NBA that we just don't have in our sport. You know, and after, you know, kind of the first year, I would just kind of, or, you know, or let's say on a daily basis, I open up Twitter and I see the kind of the banter back and forth of, you know, regarding strength training. I almost wish that, you know, every person working, you know, in our space could come live in the NBA for 2 years and see how the athletes actually embrace it, because I think it's they almost intuitively feel they can that it helps them far more than I think that you know, within football that the athletes connect the dots with that. And, but that's what I've learned. I think that it's funny because basketball is clearly a highly technical sport, right? And they're all great athletes, but, you know, there's sometimes this kind of, I don't know, this thought process that, you know, well, our sport's technical and it's about keeping the ball and the technique's so important, you know, and, you know, like, just if you focus on strength training, that, you know, you're missing the point. It's a technical sport, you know. And I would say, well, basketball is equally as technical of a sport. Like, if you can't shoot, you can't, you're never going to get the big contract in the NBA, right? So these guys spend hours and hours and hours refining their skills, refining their technical ability on a daily basis. They're working, and yet they all intuitively know that the strength training is also important. That if I don't feel as powerful going up, you know, for a rebound in the second game in a back-to-back, that I'm not as effective of a player. That I do have to maintain my power. That I do have to maintain my weight, because as these guys get through 2-3 months through the season, they're losing 3-4 kilo because they're not lifting weights as much. They're not strength training, you know, the actual getting the number of calories in and the, you know, carbohydrates and proteins is a struggle. So I've got to strength train. I've got the right nutrition, so I'm not 8 kilos lighter at the end of the season. You know, that's a real thing. So there's just kind of this acknowledgement of the importance of strength training, and then along with, like, we've not discussed this, but again, tendon health is hugely important in basketball, whether, you know, Achilles, patella, and if you're not actively going in and loading Achilles, patella on a daily basis in the weight room, then you will have patella pain, patella tendon pain, or like just the patella tendon pain is, patella tendinopathy is such a huge issue in the NBA, you know, and we all know just kind of these strategies around mitigating patella tendinopathy symptoms. It's load, and whether it's eccentric loading, whether it's isometric, but this, you know, the tendon programs and actually loading your tendons is extremely important in the weight room on a daily basis. So I almost think there's a natural acknowledgement to that and understanding of that in basketball that we just don't have, you know. And I think, you know, me and you were talking before the show about perceptions, right? Sometimes a guy will say, well, I don't strength train, but he'll go in and he'll use the K box and he'll do, you know, kind of isometric tendon work. And no, he's strength training. He just isn't seeing it as strength training. Like, strength training doesn't have to be, you know, putting 100 kilo on a bar and putting on someone's back and doing, you know, squats or deadlifts or whatever. It doesn't have to be that. You can do eccentric work in a K box, and you can do a tendon loading program, and that's very effective. I just think there's a general, like, you know, acceptance of that. I mean, we have guys that will, you know, lift the morning of game days, or it's very common to have post-game strength sessions in the NBA. Guys that play lower minutes, or guys that feel like if you have a back-to-back and the next day's off, and then 2 days after you play, they'll come in the gym and do a light lift after a game, because they know their body needs it. And it just, you just don't see that as much in our sport.
What do you think is the important factor for changing that culture and that understanding then, Dave?
I think it's got to, I mean, well, changing, I think the head coach or manager drives the culture so much within these sports that you have to have a head coach or manager that knows the importance, right? Like, as you as a practitioner can jump up and down and say, this is really important, we got to get in the weight room, we got to do this, but if things don't happen from the top down in organizations, then it's really hard to make change. You can maybe, but you're always fighting an uphill battle. Where if the head coach or manager comes in and says, this is how we do things, this is our standard, when the players know what their expectations are. So I think it's about coach education, or at least head coaches being open to allowing staff to fully do their role without kind of micromanaging. We brought up the thing with Bayern, right? The Bayern pre and post kind of COVID shutdown and what the players look like, and clearly the players embrace strength training, and again, they did not necessarily win because of their strength training, but again, the pre-post pictures, and you can't look at Bayern and say that the Lewandowskis and those guys that got Muller and those guys that got so much bigger, it certainly didn't hurt them the way they played at all. And if you ask the teams that they played against, physically how impressive they were, that is more, I think, the openness to the head coach and allowing staffs to fully do their jobs rather than putting the handbrake on, at all times, and being afraid that they're going to have to do less on the field. They're not going to be able to do the tactical work on the field. We don't prioritize strength training, and I think that's what you hear at times from different organizations.
Yeah, there's many different confusing statements made out there about strength training, isn't there? It's constantly, we were talking about it just before, like there's constantly leaning one way, leaning the other way, and people get very confused about it. But it does come down to fundamentals, doesn't it? And understanding those fundamentals. And I was going to ask you as well, on reflection of going from soccer to the NBA back to soccer, are there any sort of key things that you've pointed out that you'd amend or change in terms of the gym work that the players are doing, or anything that you just feel like things have progressed over the last few years?
Well, I would definitely say like the tendon work again. I think just to be in the NBA and to see the amount of time we spend looking at tendon health relative to what we do, and in football, it's night and day. And so I think, again, I reflected on some different cases that I had in the past of guys that had patella tendinopathies, and the kind of the complex programs we had in place in the NBA. I think far kind of outdid what we were doing kind of whatever a decade ago and within MLS. So tendon work is super important. I think, again, there's this acceptance that certain parts of power training, what true power training really is, within the weight room, is important for kind of power maintenance. And again, this is one of those things in soccer where we want to get that typically on the field, but does it have to be on the field? And I don't think so. And then, it was interesting being in a sport like basketball because it is such a vertical sport, right? We always kind of think, horizontal force production, lateral force production, but it was interesting, within the basketball where the focus is so important on kind of this vertical force production, and using force plate data really effectively. That I think those are resisted jumps and some of the resisted jumping that again, basketball players accept they want to do, they search for, that there's still soccer players that are concerned about that, concerned of doing too much. And again, I think recognizing it's the individualization of the athlete as well, because going back to some of the points of learning about each individual guy, we've had a couple guys in Orlando that are these super elastic athletes, right? Like you might want to jump into down the road and they're talking about how strong is strong enough, and like this whole talk, but then what type of athlete are they? Are they more kind of strength power type guys? Are they super elastic? We had a couple just super elastic jumpers, like kind of like hyper mobile, super elastic, jumping type guys that could just, could, get the ball, elevate, jump over everyone, shoot, just so relaxed. And that guy, if you overload that guy with a ton of super heavy concentric strength exercises, he just doesn't feel good. Right? His body doesn't like that. So it's also like acknowledging what certain athletes need, and then the type of athlete, right? And so the aerobic guy versus the big strong power guy versus the super elastic athletes. And the super elastic athlete, you have to be really careful how you load that guy, because you can almost like blunt his elasticity by kind of overloading him. And this guy will kind of like naturally kind of knew he'd come in, he'd get some work done when he wanted to. He didn't necessarily embrace it as much, but part of it was because he was so elastic, and he was maybe the best athlete I had ever worked with, so being able to understand what each athlete needs based on their physiology. And this was, again, the NBA, a totally different type of athlete in terms of their, just some of the elasticity and vertical force production was fascinating.
Yeah, no, definitely. And then we wanted to just open up. It's not so much a question, more than a debate. And I know you've touched on it there, of how strong is strong enough, because we'll have players listen to this, we'll have coaches listen to this, and we talk a lot about strength training, but I suppose it's determining where we're trying to get to. And like you say, understanding that individual is so important, isn't it? On that scale of things and how we work with everyone.
Yeah. And why you're strength training too. I think, again, we've had, you want athletes to get strong, but do you want them to gain weight? Like we had, within the NBA over a series of years, we had the club drafted kind of young, super long, physically underdeveloped guys that the goal was to gain 5 kilos of muscle on them per year to get them where they needed to be from 19, 20 to 23, 24. And so how you strength train is going to be a little bit different, right? Eccentric control and some of the, again, there's, eccentric strength versus concentric strength. And, obviously the hamstrings are a huge issue. It's interesting now with an MLS, we're hitting that kind of wall where you're seeing injury rates in MLS start to go up, with us, the league trying to get the games and they want, so they can start the playoffs in November. And you're seeing lots of hamstrings, lots of knees. And so again, there's this kind of eccentric control. We've spent a lot of time, I'm sure you've had a lot of good guests talk about eccentrically, how strong is strong enough, and in eccentric strength, continuing to hammer out eccentric strength is critical. And then knees, again, with an MLS, I think there's been a series of kind of ACLs and MCLs. And again, the lack of ability to kind of dynamically control while planting, landing, and a tackle. You've seen a whole slew of knee injuries just in the past month in MLS. And I think a lot, some were contact, some were non-contact, but also almost across the board, there was a lack of ability to eccentric control as they kind of went into a tackle or as they kind of jumped and landed. Versus your big, strong central defender that just has to feel like he's still big and strong and has to feel like he can still jump and elevate. And that guy, and we've had in Seattle, I was lucky to work with a guy, Chad Marshall, who was, I think, 3-time MLS Defender of the Year. And you might look at him and say that he's lazy, but he wasn't lazy. Like, he knew his body and he knew what he needed. And, we would play on Saturday, and on Sunday he would come in, and on Sunday he would do, a very, very small volume of really heavy hex bar deadlifts and like a really small volume of really heavy strength work, rather than go out in the field and do a run and then take Monday off. And that made him feel great. Right. So again, I think the individualization, the load is really, really important. And the type of athletes, and then looking at, the big, strong, heavy guy that made, eccentric work, the young athlete that might still need hypertrophy, the quicker midfielders that do need some just eccentric control. And what that really means by how strong is strong enough, it's really what type of strength I think we're talking about.
Yeah, definitely. And you used the word quite a few times there in terms of how they feel as
Yeah.
well. And that's a really important side of it as well, isn't it? Because if we're delving into the psychological sides of strength training, that can be huge as well, can't it? And sort of relating to what we were saying about Bayern,
Yeah.
yeah, these guys are looking better, they're looking a little bit bigger, but they're probably feeling good as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's part of our role to really figure out how guys are performing, but also their perception of how they're performing and their perception of their physical ability and what makes them perceive that they're physically in a good space. And if that's accurate or not. I mean, typically when a guy comes and he says, his perception is, I feel great. Like, I just feel so good. I feel like I could run forever. You've kind of somehow stumbled upon what's worked for that guy. Um, and then again, it goes back to, how you're individualizing everything. If you can kind of figure out each different athlete, what makes them feel really good, and hopefully you have data that you're feeding back to them, whether it's running stats, whether it's force play type stuff, whether it's an HRV type thing that you're tying data back into this perception of how they're feeling. So you're trying to give them quantitative data to match their qualitative view of their state, their performance. Then you're guiding them into being able to create some benchmarks and targets that you'd like for them to hit on the field or in the weight room, or or whatever that might be, or as part of their recovery. So to me, the feeling part really means that's a qualitative data point that now you're trying to match, let's say, quantitative information to.
Brilliant. I think that's great advice for any coaches. Dave, I think we'll move it on to the
Okay.
quick fire.
Okay.
So we've got some quick fire questions for you, the ones we've done for the last few episodes. So first of all, what's that? Sorry.
They're tough ones. They're tough ones.
You know what's coming. First of all, your biggest career influence or influences?
I would say, again, as I stopped playing, the staff, with the Washington Freedom, I had two coaches there that's really kind of empowered me. I think there was a couple coaches that empowered me, and I was very lucky. I was coaching at George Mason University, 2005, 2006, and it just so happened that in 2005, Greg Andrulis, who was with the Columbus Crew, he ended up getting let go from the Columbus Crew and came to George Mason straight from MLS, and kind of empowered me at that time. And he brought an assistant coach that the two of us went to Kansas City, and so for kind of 2 years we had a full MLS coaching staff that worked within a college team, within the U.S. that helped kind of give me the confidence to know that the methods that we're using actually work, and would work with professional athletes. And so I was still doing stuff with the Washington Freedom as well. And so there's kind of this window of 2004 to 2006 where, I'd taken that Check A license course. I was with Greg Andrulis, at George Mason, working like an MLS staff. I was working with the women's pro team with the Washington Freedom and designing sessions there. And to be able to have two coaching staffs there that were just so open, let me, almost try whatever I wanted to do. And it works and what doesn't work. And it goes back to like with the phrase I was using before, like not stepping on a landmine, right? You will eventually step on a landmine, but you hope when you step on a landmine, no one's watching, right? And those two coaching staffs allowed me to kind of step on some landmines without anyone watching, which, I think every young practitioner needs, right? Because you are going to make mistakes. You have to make mistakes, but you have to be in an environment where no one makes a big deal out of your mistakes after you make them. And, those were two staffs that definitely allowed me to do that.
So basically we've got to find these landmines in the right locations.
Yeah.
No, it's a great point. And then the next one, Dave, your biggest strength as a coach, what would you say your biggest strength is as a coach?
I think it's funny you always ask this question, and I always wonder, like, to the people that answer, it's what we hope they are, but we don't always know that they are. I would hope that my strength is again, I think the relationship with the head coach or manager and being able to find the right solutions on the field, in the weight room, pair what's in the weight room together, what's happening on the field, be able to provide the head coach with solutions, again, that tick our physical boxes together with what he's trying to achieve over the course of the week, and really work in an integrated way with the coach. Again, that's what I hope that my strength is. But again, I think it's really understanding the game and how you change different exercises, and how you change different exercises impacts the loading, and then to work with the coach to really get all the boxes ticked that he wants to.
Brilliant. And then next one, what's the best bit of CPD or webinar that you've seen or done recently?
Again, I think it was interesting talking to Ruud van Elk. You talked to him last week, and he brought up, the Sounders, I think, conferences were good. The Sports Science Conference with Seattle, and then they also have the analytics one as well. That was also very, very good. I've really liked the high intensity training program with Paul Larson and Martin Bouchette. Their course that they do, I think that's a very good one as well for anyone interested in kind of the nuts and bolts of the metabolic side and high intensity training. I thought that was a really good course. So probably those two together. I'm working on a PhD in organizational leadership and development, so I don't have as much time for outside CPD. But
that's understandable. Understandable. And then final ones, Dave. What would you say the best trait to have is from a coach, or most important trait to have from a coach?
Well, I would definitely say, post my NBA experience, I think the most important quality is the ability to be transparent to athletes, and to be able to do it in the right way. And I think it's really underestimated. Athletes need the truth. Athletes need to hear honest feedback. And that's what's, I think, so interesting about all these, kind of all or nothing Amazon shows, is you see the coach or manager trying to provide feedback to coaches. And I've seen, Steve Clifford is the head coach of Orlando Magic that I've been able to work with the last 2 years, and his ability to provide honest, direct feedback that's taken in by the players is something that I've never actually seen at that high quality before, because if a guy's not working hard enough, you have to be able to tell a guy he's not working hard enough in a way that he accepts as truth. And that's really hard. And there's an art to that. There's an art of providing feedback and critiquing someone in a way that's not personal at all. Right? Too many times it becomes personal. It's you don't do this because I don't like you. The athlete thinks that the coach doesn't like them, and it has to come from a place of, listen, this is how it is, and I wish it wasn't like this, but this is the truth. And it's a really hard conversation. It's coaching can be emotionally very draining, because you are asked to be really honest to athletes to help them get better on a daily, weekly basis. It never stops, right? And the human condition is for athletes to sometimes take the easy road, and or to relax, or to be complacent, right? And so coaching is about making sure people, and it can also be other staff members and athletes, are not complacent. And that's an emotionally draining place to go, I think, all the time. And then to keep providing that feedback in a way that's never personal, I think is it's a skill. I think the really, really good coaches do that really well.
And then just to flip on that, what would you say is the best trait to have as a player?
Yeah, and then I think that the flip side is to be able to accept that, to not take things personally. But I think also just the best trait is to feel like you've never arrived, right? And I think it's what's interesting about being able to live in the space in the NBA is you're around, the number of people that are around a player like Kobe Bryant, right? Or head coach Steve Clifford worked with Kobe Bryant with the Lakers as an assistant, and if you look at that type player, like if you look at the top NBA players, and our head coach, Coach Clifford would say that all the time, like they're crazy. Like they're literally crazy how hard they work. Like, yes, it's true. Kobe Bryant would work out 3 times a day in the off season because he had certain things he wanted to work on. And there's like an obsessiveness to getting better that I think a lot of the top players in the NBA have. And I feel like sometimes we do worry sometimes about overloading and players doing too much and, not giving them too much work because they need to focus on recovery. But your very top players, athletes, they have to be obsessed with getting better. And I'm not sure if all of them are all the time, but the really special ones do. And you look like a Cristiano Ronaldo, like you get that sense like he wants to be he's driven by being the best every single day. And everyone can have their own opinion about him. If they like him, they don't like him. He's a nice guy. He's not a nice guy, but you can tell he is driven to be the best every single day.
Yeah, and it's what Jack Naylor said, actually. I asked him that question because he worked with him at Real Madrid, and he said, I think his words were something like he wants to maximize everything he does.
Yeah.
And that's what the top players do, isn't it? That's the way they work.
The NBA is a little bit different environment, but you do have guys like we have to worry about our guys coming in to do extra shooting at 10 o'clock at night. Like and doing that too often. And what's the nature of that? And even we're in the NBA bubble in June and July or July and August. And the NBA sets up where every team has a window from 9 to 10 or 10 to 11 every night for guys to do extra work. And that's part of the NBA culture is guys want to go do a little bit of work every single night. And, there was definitely 1 or 2 players where we had to hold back. Like as we started games, they still wanted to go every night. And like, now again, there's a financial reward.
Yeah.
It goes back again, like because basketball is a more easily quantifiable game. If a guy can move from 32% 3-point shooting to 37% 3-point shooting, that might mean he makes X million dollars more per year if he can establish he's that much better. And so players that are driven by that and they work hard, like they become obsessed with that. And and that was kind of fascinating to see that from that side, because that has not always been our football culture.
Yeah, definitely. Dave, this has been great. I think there's loads in this one. So it's great to delve into your experiences. So thank you very much for coming on the podcast. Thank you.
Thanks for having me. It's an honor to be on. Like I said, you've had some great guests, so it's a privilege.
Brilliant. And just finally, Dave, is there anywhere that you direct people to sort of keep up with what you've got going on? Would it be your Twitter or?
Yeah, probably Twitter. I think it's at Dave Tenney is the Twitter handle. So that's my social media platform of choice, I guess. So.
Real. Well, Dave, thanks a lot, and all the best at Austin.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
We'll stay in touch. Thanks, mate.
Okay, good luck.
Cheers. Bye.